Ready for a deep dive that turns the tables on how we usually think about men running the show throughout history?
I am.
We're cracking open Cyborgs versus Earth Goddess
Okay.
with the author himself, Dr. M. Seenarine.
Yeah, Dr. Seenarine's work is really fascinating. I mean, he's not just a historian.
Right. He's coming at this from all these different angles.
Anthropology, women's studies.
hmm
He's really looked at gender and power dynamics across so many cultures.
And even lived and published research in Japan,
Exactly.
which adds such a rich global perspective to his work.
Definitely.
And what really struck me was how he dedicated the book to his mother and grandmothers,
Right.
describing it as this personal exploration of female lineage and power. It's like he's uncovering this hidden history within his own family, which then, expands outward to encompass all of humanity. It's powerful stuff.
And it really makes you rethink those common assumptions we have about, well, male dominance being the natural order of things, right?
Totally. Like, we're so used to hearing that men have always been in charge since, like, the dawn of time.
Yeah, like it's just a given.
But Dr. Seenarine throws that whole narrative out the window. He argues that for a huge chunk of human history, things were actually radically different.
And he has the evidence to back it up.
Right. He introduces this concept of Gynocentricism, which I have to admit, the first time I saw that word, I was like, whoa, that's a mouthful.
It's a big word,
Yeah.
but it represents a really big idea.
So break it down for us. What is Gynocentrism all about?
So imagine a society where it's not about one gender dominating the other, but about finding balance, living in harmony with nature, and prioritizing the well-being of the entire community. And at the heart of it all are women.
Okay, so less about ruling with an iron fist and more about, like, nurturing and sustaining. But how do we know this wasn't just some idealistic fantasy? I mean, are we really supposed to believe that Stone Age societies were these havens of gender equality?
Well, it's not quite as simple as saying they were utopias, but Seenarine presents archaeological evidence that points to the prevalence of matrilocal societies way back then.
Matrilocal, meaning?
Meaning centered around the mother's lineage. So instead of women joining men's families when they married, which is what we're used to now, it was the opposite.
Whoa, so the guys were the ones moving in with the in-laws?
Exactly. They lived on the women's land, and children inherited property and social standing through their mothers.
That flips the script on everything we think we know about family dynamics.
It does.
But was this like a one-off thing? Or are we talking about a widespread phenomenon?
Seenarine's research suggests it was more common than you might think. He digs up examples from all corners of the globe.
Oh, like who? Give us some specifics.
Well, take the Iroquois, for example. Their women had serious clout. They controlled the land, managed resources, and even had powerful roles in councils, making decisions about war and peace.
Wait, women were calling the shots in matters of war.
You got it.
That definitely challenges some of those stereotypical images of women being relegated to the sidelines throughout history.
Right. And it wasn't just the Iroquois. Look at the Cherokee. They held this deep reverence for women's connection to nature, viewing them as these powerful givers of life. Motherhood wasn't seen as a weakness, but as integral to their whole society.
It's like their whole worldview was completely different.
It was.
Instead of seeing these roles as burdens, they were the source of respect, even power, which honestly makes you wonder how things shifted so drastically.
Yeah. And it wasn't just the social structures that were different. Seenarine argues that these societies were actually built on a whole other economic model as well. He calls it the mother's gift economy.
Okay, mother's gift economy. Now I'm really curious.
Right.
So instead of everyone out for themselves, it was more about, like, taking care of each other and making sure everyone had what they needed.
Exactly. It was about the collective good, especially for future generations.
Okay, but I have to admit, I'm having a hard time picturing how this mother's gift economy thing actually worked in a real society.
It definitely makes you question, right?
It does. Like, was it really possible to create a sustainable system based on sharing and generosity?
Well, Seenarine doesn't claim it was some perfect utopia or anything, but he does point to some present-day examples to show us how it could work.
Wait, there are societies that still operate this way today.
There are.
Get out. Tell me everything.
Well, one example is the Mosuo people in China.
Okay.
The eldest woman in the family, she's in charge of all the resources for the whole household.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility.
It is, but it also shows how deeply this idea of collective stewardship is woven into their culture.
Right, like you're not just looking out for yourself, you're looking out for your entire family line.
And it's not just about, like, practicality and resources. The Bribri people of Costa Rica are another example.
Okay, what about them?
Only women can inherit land.
Oh.
And they're the only ones who can perform these sacred rituals. It's like the physical and spiritual were all connected for them.
So they hold the keys to both the material and spiritual well-being of the community. That's amazing.
Right. But here's the big question. If this way of life, this eco-gynocentrism, worked so well for so long, what happened?
Yeah, why the sudden shift? Why did patriarchy become the dominant force if humans had already found a system that worked?
Well, Seenarine argues that it wasn't so much a sudden shift, but a gradual one. And a lot of it can be traced back to the domestication of plants and animals.
Agriculture. Seriously. How did farming lead to such a huge change in power dynamics?
Well, think about it. Agriculture meant that for the first time, humans could produce a surplus of food.
Okay, that makes sense.
We went from having to hunt and gather to being able to stay in one place and cultivate crops.
But how did that shift the balance of power?
Because with that surplus came the need for control. Someone had to decide how to manage it, how to distribute it, who benefited.
And that someone ended up being men.
Unfortunately, that's what the evidence seems to suggest. As societies became more sedentary, those older ways of life, the hunter-gatherer traditions that often included more equal social structures, well, those started to fade away.
So instead of moving around and sharing resources more equally, we became tied to the land, and men took control of this new agricultural wealth.
In a nutshell, yeah. And it wasn't just about the food either. The domestication of animals, especially horses, played a huge role.
Horses?
Horses were essential for warfare.
Yeah.
They allowed societies to be more mobile, which made them more powerful.
Yeah.
And guess who was mostly in control of the horses?
Men.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you had this whole other layer of power dynamics emerging on the battlefield. Seenarine uses the example of the Yamnaya people to illustrate this.
The who?
The Yamnaya, they were these fierce horsemen who migrated across Europe thousands of years ago.
Okay.
They had this incredible military advantage because of their horses, and they basically spread their patriarchal social structure as they conquered new territories.
So it was like this double whammy, the rise of agriculture and the use of horses in warfare, both attributed to men gaining more power.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about brute force either. This shift in power was also reflected in the stories societies told themselves.
What do you mean?
Well, around this same time, we see the emergence of more male-dominated religions.
Like replacing older traditions that might have been more female-centric?
Right, the older goddess-centered belief systems, the ones that celebrated women's power and their connection to nature, those started to be replaced by religions that put men in charge.
So it was almost like a rewriting of history, a way of justifying this new power structure by saying, see, even the gods agree with us.
Exactly. It shows just how powerful those narratives are, those stories we tell ourselves about the world, and how they can be used to reinforce existing power structures.
It's like this massive shift happened. We went from these societies where balance was valued, where women held positions of power and had this deep connection to the earth. And we ended up, well, where we are now. And it makes you wonder, if those early societies thrived for thousands of years with such a different set of values, what does that tell us about our own potential?
That's what makes Seenarine's work so important, I think. He's not just digging up ancient history here. He's challenging us to rethink everything we thought we knew about gender and power, about the very foundations of human society.
It's like he's saying, hey, this whole patriarchy thing, it wasn't inevitable. We could have gone in a totally different direction.
Exactly. And by uncovering these alternative ways of being, these societies where women were central to social and spiritual life, we can start to imagine different possibilities for ourselves even today.
So it's less about romanticizing the past and more about using it as a source of inspiration, right? Like, okay, we can't just go back to living in hunter-gatherer societies.
Right.
But maybe there are lessons we can learn from them, principles we can adapt to create a more equitable and sustainable world.
Exactly. And what's amazing is that these principles, these eco-gynocentric values, they haven't completely vanished. Seenarine points out that there are still matrilineal societies thriving around the world today.
Really? You're kidding. I had no idea.
Oh, yeah. And they're not just clinging to some ancient relics of the past either. These cultures are living, breathing examples of how different social structures can work, how different ways of being are possible.
That's incredible. It's like a living testament to the resilience of these older ways of knowing, these different ways of organizing society. Do any of them stand out as particularly strong examples? Have they managed to resist the pressure to conform to more dominant patriarchal norms?
They have,
Yeah.
and they do. Seenarine talks about several in the book. Each one is unique, of course, but they all share this common thread of female leadership community-centric values, and a deep respect for the natural world.
It gives me hope, honestly, to know that these alternatives exist, that they're not just figments of our imagination.
I know what you mean.
They're real-life examples of what's possible when we question those old narratives, those old assumptions about who holds power and how that power should be used.
Absolutely. And it begs the question, if these early humans, if they thrived for millennia, with women at the helm, with a different set of values guiding their societies, shouldn't we at least be asking ourselves if there's a different way? I mean, are we so sure we've got it all figured out?
Right. Maybe those old ways of knowing, those eco-gynocentric values that seenarine talks about, maybe they hold the key to solving some of the biggest challenges we face today. Climate change, social injustice, you name it.
It's something to think about, that's for
Yep.
sure.
It is. And on that note, dear listeners, we leave you with this. Don't be afraid to question the narratives you've been given. Don't be afraid to dig a little deeper, to explore those alternative perspectives, because you never know what you might find. And who knows, maybe those discoveries will spark a revolution, a reimagining of what it means to be human, a world where balance, cooperation, and respect for all beings, regardless of gender, isn't some radical idea, but just the way things are. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey, and until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep digging deeper into the mysteries of our shared human story.